promoting dialogue.
It's 6 p.m. in Dakar and Accra, 7 p.m. in Cotonou. Good evening and welcome to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM in Dakar, Senegal. Around the world at wadr.org. We're also live on Facebook and on YouTube. Here are our top stories this evening. Nigeria's High Court hands life sentences to suspects in Oyo State student abductions.
Basically, one of the biggest challenges that we have is resource control and resource allocation.
Human Rights Watch accuses Niger's junta of deepening repression 3 years after military takeover. Gambian government convenes first tripartite meeting to strengthen democratic institutions and ensure rule of law. And ECOWAS announces push for West Africa's eco single currency in 2027, raising questions over readiness.
I don't see the practicality of launching the ECO 2027. It is not just possible. And the reason for that is the global dynamic.
Do stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Atewi Mbila with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast. Newslink begins in Nigeria, where the Federal High Court today sentenced 3 men for the May 15 abduction in Oyo State. The men will serve life prison sentences, and they were served this by the court sitting in Abuja for the roles in the abduction of 46 pupils and teachers in the area. Now, Thursday's conviction marks a significant development in the prosecution of abductees and those who commit these acts. And WADR's Yechenu Sasetu brings us the details of this story.
Justice Salim Ibrahim convicted Abdulrazak Umar, Yunusa Musa, and Shamsu Adamusani on charges including terrorism, kidnapping, and concealing information about terrorist activities. Prosecutors also identified the men as members of Darul Salam, a group alleged to be affiliated with the banned Ansaru terrorist organization operating in the northeast region of Nigeria. The federal government brought a 10-count charge against the suspects, including terrorism, kidnapping, incitement, and illegal mining. The court ruled that their life sentences would take effect from the date of their arrest. The case stems from the May 15 attack on schools in the Esiele and Yawota communities, where gunmen abducted 39 pupils and 7 teachers. 2 teachers were killed during the assault. The remaining hostages were rescued on July 10 during an intelligence-led military operation in the Old Oyo National Park, where the kidnappers were believed to be hiding. Security analyst Olumayowa Olani says while successful prosecutions are vital, authorities must also invest in prevention to stop young people from being recruited into extremist and criminal networks.
Basically, one of the biggest challenges that we have is resource control and resource allocation. You go to Zamfara. One of the triggers to the crisis in Zamfara is the gold mine. Go to some other places, you see that is the issue of lithium. Hardly will you find any place, anywhere in the country where we have security crisis that you will not see resource control and resource allocation at the bed of it. That puts a lot of responsibility on government.
The ruling comes as Nigerian authorities intensify efforts to prosecute terrorism and kidnapping cases while security forces continue operations against armed groups across the country. For WADR, Yechenu Sasetu in Abuja.
We are staying in Nigeria because just as the news about the sentencing of the 3 kidnappers made rounds, a report about an armed attack emerged from the northwestern state of Zamfara. At least 24 farmers were killed by gunmen locally known as bandits when they stormed several farming communities in the Sauna district. Several others were wounded in the raid that residents say lasted about 3 hours. Zamfara is at the center of the security crisis in Nigeria's northwest, where armed gangs frequently raid villages, kidnap residents for ransom, and steal livestock. Let's now cross over to the Sahel, and Mali could be welcoming American troops soon to assist in the fight against terrorists operating in the northern region. According to a senior U.S. national security official cited by the Washington Post, the planned operation will include airstrikes targeted at the Jnim fighters. The source speaking to today, on condition of anonymity, states that the proposal is being debated. Imo Edet completes the story.
According to the Washington Post, citing a senior U.S. national security official, the United States is considering military strikes in Mali, targeting the Group for the Support of Islams and Muslims, JNIM, an Al-Qaeda-linked militant group. JNIM has been active in Mali for more than a decade and has expanded its attacks across several West African countries. Despite years of military operations, Malian forces have struggled to defeat the group. The report says U.S. President Donald Trump is reviewing the implications of a possible military operation in Mali, although the proposal is said to be dividing officials within the U.S. national security establishment. If approved, Mali would become the 8th country where the United States has carried out military action since President Trump returned to the White House. The report comes after Washington recently reaffirmed its support for West African countries battling terrorist groups. However, it remains unclear whether any potential operation would be coordinated with the Malian authorities. Earlier this year, senior U.S. officials visited Mali to discuss reviving security cooperation, although few details were made public. The United States has carried out military strikes in Nigeria as part of its security cooperation with the Nigerian Armed Forces.
Imo Edet reporting there. In neighboring Niger, the ruling military is facing fresh criticism over its human rights record nearly 3 years after seizing power. In the report released today, Human Rights Watch says the transitional authority in Niamey has tightened the grip on power by dismantling democratic institutions and repressing political opponents. The document also highlights shrinking civic space and the silencing of journalists and civil society groups. Here is Veronica Njai with the details.
The rights group says since overthrowing President Mohamed Bazoum in July 2023, Niger's military rulers have steadily expanded their powers while weakening institutions meant to hold them accountable. According to Human Rights Watch, the authorities have dissolved political parties and independent unions, suspended civil society organizations, prosecuted journalists under cybercrime laws, stripped opposition figures of their nationality, and prolonged the political transition without a roadmap for elections. The organization also expressed concern over the continued detention of former President Mohamed Bazoum, his wife, former Interior Minister Hama Amadou Souley, and prominent human rights defender Moussa Tiangari. It notes that the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has ruled that the detention of both Bazoum and Tiangari violates international human rights law and has called for their immediate release. Human Rights Watch further criticized recent legal changes extending pre-trial detention in terrorism-related cases, saying they risk being used to keep critics behind bars for prolonged periods. Human Rights Watch is urging the Nigerian military authorities to end arbitrary detention, restore fundamental freedoms, and present a credible roadmap for a return to constitutional rule.
You heard there Veronica Njai with those details.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Let's now talk governance, because the Gambia has launched its first ever tripartite conference in the Commonwealth Latimer House Principles. The conference brings together the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary arms of government to strengthen constitutional governance, the rule of law, and cooperation among them. From Banjul, Rose Samara Cates reports.
The Gambia has opened its first tripartite conference on the Commonwealth Latimer House Principles, bringing together the executive, legislature, and judiciary to strengthen democratic governance and institutional cooperation in the country. President Adama Barrow officially launched the conference at the Sir Dawda Kairaba Jawara International Conference Center, where participants are discussing particular reforms to reinforce the separation of power, accountability, and rule of law. Speaking, President Barrow says democracy flourishes when the executive, legislature, and judiciary remains independent whilst working together in national interests.
We should make that the executive will govern accountability, that the legislature will legislate responsibly, and that the judiciary will educate justly and independently. Together, we will uphold the Latimer House principles as the guiding light of our democracy.
National Assembly clerk Khalifa Mbai described the gathering as a milestone in the Gambia's constitutional journey, saying it is expected to produce concrete committees to improve collaboration amongst the three arms of government.
Parliament can only discharge its oversight responsibility effectively within an environment where judicial independence is respected, executive accountability is embraced. And of course, equally, the executive and the judiciary perform their constitutional mandates most effectively.
Chief Justice Hassan B. Jallow stressed that judicial independence remains central to protecting citizens' rights while calling for sustainable dialogue and mutual respect between the three arms of government. The Gambian leader is urging delegates to deliver practical recommendations that will strengthen governance and restore public confidence in state institutions. For WADR, Rose Samara Cates, Banjul.
Let's now go to Guinea, where the National Assembly has completed the formation of its key structures. The parliamentary leadership, political groups, and standing committees are now in place. Lawmakers from the presidential majority have united under one parliamentary bloc, while opposition and independent deputies formed separate groups. Augustine Colley reports.
The new National Assembly has elected its leadership, including a speaker, 5 deputy speakers, 7 parliamentary secretaries, and 2 parliamentary quaestors. However, opposition lawmakers and independent deputies failed to secure any positions within the Assembly's governing bodies. 3 parliamentary groups have now been formed. The first is made up of the ruling party, GMD, and its allies, representing the presidential majority with 127 lawmakers. The second group brings together opposition members, while the third is made up of independent deputies. The plan to create a single parliamentary group combining opposition and independent lawmakers has therefore been abandoned. The newly elected legislators say they are ready to introduce new laws aimed at strengthening oversight of government action, regulating rental prices, creating more employment opportunities for young people, and protecting human rights. Political observers say that with the ruling majority holding 127 of the 147 seats in parliament, opposition and independent lawmakers may struggle to exert significant influence against the dominant parliamentary bloc.
Journal Alpha Ibrahima Balde's report presented by Augustine Colley. Let's now bring you some news on the diplomatic front. First, President John Dramani Mahama of Ghana says the African Union has agreed to place the recent xenophobic violence in South Africa on the agenda of its next summit. The decision follows talks in Accra with AU Commission Chairperson Mahmoud Ali Yusuf. Now, Mahama says Accra has no quarrel with Pretoria but cannot remain silent as Ghanaian nationals and other Africans come under attack. The announcement comes after the repatriation of hundreds of West African migrants from South Africa amid growing concern across the continent about the loss of lives and destruction of businesses owned by foreigners in the country. Against this backdrop, Ghana says a coordinated African response is essential to protect citizens and safeguard regional solidarity. Meanwhile, former Senegalese President Macky Sall is among candidates presenting their visions for the future leadership of the United Nations as the race to succeed Antonio Guterres moves forward. A total of 6 candidates, including 4 women, will be taking part in a town hall meeting in New York today, organized by the UN General Assembly. Their vision statement would at least lay out a roadmap for addressing some of the monumental crises around the world, such as security, political stability, economic pressures, human rights, and climate change, among others. However, this year's contest is a historic one because UN member states and civil society organizations are urging the appointment of the first woman to lead the organization. Since its creation in 1945, the UN has never had a woman serve as a Secretary General. Now, ECOWAS leaders are renewing their push for the launch of the ECO following the Heads of State Summit in Sierra Leone. The regional body says the long-delayed currency will be introduced gradually, with countries meeting key economic benchmarks including inflation control, debt sustainability, and monetary sustainability expected to join first. But questions still remain over member states' readiness and the currency framework. Well, to examine the opportunities and challenges surrounding the ECO, WADR spoke to Dr. Lester Tenney, Vice President for Fiscal Affairs at the University of Liberia.
I don't see the practicality of launching the ECHO 2027. It is not just possible. And the reason for that is the global dynamics. We have what we call exchange rate pass, RPT. It has to be understood very clearly. The transmission mechanism, you also need to consider what will be the determinant of the currency. There are several dimensions that need to be clearly understood. So it is not just the issue of launching a currency for the sake of a currency. It is the issue of understanding the ramification on various economies. Rushing with the process will create more economic backlash as compared to the dividend that its launch is intended to bring. Don't get me wrong, a single currency will promote trade. Businesses in various countries will have a seamless transaction, which eventually will reduce transaction cost. There will be price stability. If it is managed properly, there will be price stability, which will be reflected in a reduced inflation. A single currency gave birth to economic integration. What does that mean is that it will create a more unified regional market, and it will make it easier for goods, services, labor, and capital to move seamlessly across border. Of course, a single currency usually attracts investment, and the potential in West Africa in terms of favorable investment is very, 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 very encouraging.
You're still listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM in Dakar, Senegal, and around the world at wadr.org. Here's a recap of our top stories. Nigeria's High Court hands life sentences to suspects in Oyo State student abductions. Human Rights Watch accuses Niger's junta of deepening repression 3 years after military takeover. And Gambian government convenes first tripartite meeting to strengthen democratic institutions and ensure rule of law. We also just brought you the news of ECOWAS announcing a fresh push for West Africa's ECO single currency in 2027, but there are concerns being raised about the readiness. Still ahead, we have guest interview and sports. Do stay.
From the heart of Nigerian politics, this is Yechi Nusasitu in Abuja, and you are listening to WADR 94.9 FM Dakar.
Thanks for staying with us. Now in Liberia, 2 suspects are in custody as authorities launch an investigation into the country's largest ever cocaine seizure during a security operation near the Roberts International Airport. The Justice Ministry says nearly 4 tons of cocaine have been seized, and they have an estimated street value of $317 million. Officials say preliminary investigations point to a sophisticated transnational trafficking network that may have been operating in Liberia for more than 6 years. From Monrovia, WADR's Abraham Parker reports.
Liberia's Joint National Security Investigative Task Force says it uncovered nearly 4 tons of cocaine during a court-authorized raid on a warehouse in the VOA community based on intelligence from an ongoing narcotics investigation. Authorities say the 3,971 kilograms of cocaine have an estimated street value more than $317 million. Investigators have also recovered a firearm, GPS tracking devices, a drone, diving equipment, and other materials believed to be linked. Speaking to WADR, former Liberian Immigration Service Commissioner General Steve Zacco says the latest seizure highlights the need for stronger enforcement of the country's anti-drug laws and better coordination among security agencies.
What the seizure means, it just exposes our vulnerability, because the seizure is not a result of our own effective actions. It's so worrisome, and the way it happens suggests to me that the guys feel comfortable.
The latest operation comes just 6 weeks after authorities intercepted a $19.2 billion cocaine shipment at Roberts International Airport, prompting further public demands for accountability and stronger national security. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
Politics,
analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is The Guest.
Now, reactions continue to trail ECOWAS's renewed push for the ECO single currency, raising fresh questions about its implementation, economic readiness, and what it could mean for regional integration. To take a closer look at the opportunities and challenges surrounding the proposed currency, WADR spoke to Dr. Lester Tenney, Vice President for Fiscal Affairs and Professor of Macroeconomics at the University of Liberia.
There has to be first the gathering of economic data, each of the participant countries, economic data in terms of the various exchange rate, maybe quarterly data, annual data, GDP, population, consumer spending, consumer price index, the level of inflation. There are several data that need to be collected and analyzed because don't forget, each of the countries in Africa do not possess the same economic strength. Having a unified currency has several dimensions to smaller economies like Liberia, for example. So there has to be several studies that need to be conducted, several resolutions coming from those studies that will inform the decision of a single currency, the ECO.
ECOWAS has been talking about this for some time now. What has been holding back the implementation?
Some of the issues involve the risk associated with economies with different GDP. So, for example, one of the issues highlighted was the impact of contagion. Contagion basically is the impact of a shock that tends to spill over from one economy to another. For example, if you have a monetary shock like inflation in Nigeria, it tends to ripple into smaller economies that have the same currency. Countries in Africa need to think through very carefully. It's a good thing to have a single currency because there are several advantages, but also you need to weigh the disadvantages. So it's a process that requires long years of study, and that's one of the reasons why it has not been launched. Because the gathering of data it's just a single part. The most important part is to understand variation in different economies over a certain period of time.
Let's look at 2027 because that is the time or the date that ECOWAS has given to start ECO currency. How feasible is it looking at restructuring by some countries and global financial burdens?
I don't see the practicality of launching the ECO 2027. It is not just possible. And the reason for that is the global dynamics. We have what we call exchange rate pass RPT. It has to be understood very clearly. The transmission mechanism, you also need to consider what would be the determinant of the currency. There are several dimensions that need to be clearly understood. So it is not just the issue of launching a currency for the sake of a currency. It's the issue of understanding the ramification on various economies. Rushing with the process will create more economic backlash as compared to the dividend that its launch is intended to bring. Don't get me wrong, a single currency will promote trade. Businesses in various countries will have a seamless transaction, which eventually will reduce transaction cost. There will be price stability. If it is managed properly, there will be price stability, which will be reflected in a reduced inflation. A single currency gave birth to economic integration. What does that mean is that it will create a more unified regional market, and it will make it easier for goods, services, labor, and capital to move seamlessly across border. Of course, a single currency usually attracts investment, and the potential in West Africa in terms of favorable investment is very, 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 very encouraging. So a unified currency would do that. It will also address the issue of exchange rate differential. We in Liberia use Liberian dollar. We have a dual currency regime. You want to buy something in Nigeria, you have to convert your Liberian dollar to Naira. So all of those issues of exchange rate difficulty will be managed. And then you will have a stronger bargaining power because an ECO currency will set the pace for economic strength in terms of an integrated regional GDP.
That was Dr. Lester Tenney, Vice President for Fiscal Affairs and Professor of Macroeconomics at the University of Liberia. In the sporting world, there's a lot happening. Let's start in Morocco because the women's under-17 football team has won the North African Football Union tournament held in Tunisia from July 16 to 22, 2026. The Atlas Lionesses secured the title after a dominant 4-0 victory over host Tunisia in their final match, finishing top of the standings with 7 points from 3 games. The tournament forms part of Morocco's preparations for the FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup, which the country will host later this year. Scheduled for October 17 to November 7 in Rabat and Saleh, the world competition will see Morocco compete in Group A alongside New Zealand, Germany, and Argentina. Meanwhile, the Africa Cup of Nations is set for a major expansion, with more teams expected to compete from the 2027 edition. CAF President Patrice Motsepe says the tournament will increase to 28 participating teams, with Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda hosting the competition from June 14 to July 17, 2027. Motsepe says the move is part of CAF's plan to further grow the continent's flagship football tournament, following the decision to stage the competition every 4 years instead of every 2. Under the proposed format, the group stage will feature 7 groups of 4 teams, with CAF expected to announce details of the qualification process soon. Motsepe had also announced a major boost for women's football, with the winner of the 2026 Women Africa Cup of Nations set to receive $2 million, which is double the previous prize money. Each of the 16 participating teams will receive at least $150,000. And we have come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks to Ismaila Kamara and Maudo Ju for the technical assistance. Remember, you can also listen to us via our mobile app, WADR, and stream at wadr.org. And of course, join the conversation on our social media pages, X, Instagram, and Facebook at WADR. I am Atiewe Nimbila. Good evening.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Baft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.